Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial for my gentle and worshipful arrangement of the worship song, What a Beautiful Name. In this tutorial I'm going to go over some potential trouble spots and give you some insight into my thinking as the arranger. And right from the top, you'll see the directive, gentle, worshipful. And that really does guide the whole philosophy of this arrangement and how I as the arranger would prefer that you interpret this as you perform it. And what I mean by that is that you have throughout this arrangement these kind of motor, that's how I describe it, accompaniments. You have things like this in the left hand, and it's really a kind of meaty part that if you're not careful will get away from you. And then in the right hand at the first chorus you have this. And again, with that much movement in the right hand, it's easy for that to take over and cover up the melody. And so the biggest thing I'm going to suggest, a kind of macro suggestion for the entire arrangement, is that you be careful that here at the beginning, this left hand part does not take the foreground, that it stays in the background, that those notes are kind of all one thing, that blend together and just create sort of a moving kind of texture rather than each note getting its day in the sun. Just let them sort of collectively create this kind of texture. The same goes for the right hand coming in, the same goes for the left hand on the second verse, which comes in much deeper and fuller. Be careful to keep that subdued so that the melody in your right hand comes out. When you get to the last chorus, or the second to last chorus coming out of the bridge, and it's a fortissimo dynamic, obviously that left hand pattern really serves you well because those thick heavy chords really build up the dynamic and the energy level, and so it works well there. Now I'm just going to go through it and point out a couple things that might be difficult or unusual. Right here you have, going into the first chorus, a right hand that comes in, and I'm literally asking you to keep the left hand dynamic consistent with what it's been, and the right hand sneak in dynamically, starting out almost so quiet you can barely hear it, and then building up to what would be just an overall continue to be a piano dynamic. So it's very subtle, and I don't even know if I can replicate it on a keyboard. It's really something that is easier to replicate on an acoustic piano because you get much more sensitivity and response from the instrument. But it should go, this is like your left hand dynamic. So you hear how my left hand doesn't change dynamic, but my right hand goes from soft to loud. Honestly, that's a pretty advanced technique. And if it's a struggle, then honestly just playing your right hand softer than the left hand rather than playing this crescendo is perfectly fine and an easy way to maybe simplify it if you have to perform it this Sunday and you don't have quite enough time to practice it and get it perfect. When you have these, speaking of that spot right here, that first chorus of the left hand, I find it easier, instead of just say taking your thumb and going, just doing that, and relying on your hand going up and down at a nice speed, I guess, is to use different fingers. I can get much more, at least for myself, I can get much more expression in that melody line when I do that. I don't write that fingering in, but that's just a little trick of the trade, if you will. And that's another thing that I'll point out about these modern arrangements, or I should say these modern worship songs and trying to arrange for them, is they're much more built around rhythm and harmony than they are around melody. So the melodies are a little bit less interesting than we're used to, but the harmonies and the rhythms are much more the focus. And so the challenge for us as pianists is we'll have a melody like this that doesn't have a lot of movement, doesn't have a lot of arc or linear development to it, doesn't really have any development to it. And so we have to figure out a way to make that interesting. And the best way I know how to do it is dynamically and rhythmically. So if you've got a pattern of, was this 8? Well, you got 6 G's in a row and then 2 F sharps. Rather than playing them like a robot, I'll try to give it a phrase like that, so it's much more interesting. And if that doesn't make sense, or you're struggling to do that, then again, I always suggest this: sing it in your head while you play it, and play it like you would sing it if you were trying to be expressive. What a beautiful name it is. So that kind of swell and then bringing it back down at the end of the phrase is what you want to communicate in your playing, just like you would sing it. Okay, moving on. We get to okay, well that, man, before I move on, that gets really important in your right hand at the second chorus, starting at measure 28. You have the melody sitting on top of a chord, and the chord doesn't change. It's just this A and D. If you play it like a machine gun, like I just did, this is really going to be an annoying arrangement. I think anybody listening will recognize it and they'll be singing along themselves, and so it'll still be a blessing. But boy, this arrangement can really shine when you just give it that extra feeling. All right, when we get to the bridge, it's self-explanatory, but when you start having it measure 47, the left hand doing these runs, I put in a 5 finger here because it really makes it a lot easier if you immediately cross your 5 finger and you just walk up. You don't even need to look at the notes at that point, because the finger, if you follow my fingering, it's all laid out for you. Like that. Then when it starts getting a little more complicated, it's the same idea. You're just immediately crossing that pinky over. Actually, you're not really crossing it over, you're leaping up to a pinky. Like. And if you do that, it just sets you up for the rest of the line. You don't even need to look at it or think about it. Your hand's right in position and it's super easy. When you get to the big powerful chorus, measure 63, your left hand, I'm going to play an octave higher so I don't bump the camera stand. I suggest some fingering, and this is what I use, and I think it's the easiest way to play this, where you hit that first chord in your left hand with your 5th and your 2nd finger. And the reason for that is because you're always going to be playing that sort of root 5th with those fingers. And so if you just always play it that way, then you're always in position. Oops. So whenever you have a low hit and then you're camped out here, I literally just do a leap like that. And then I'm in position for these following notes for the rest of the measure. Same with that, measure 64. You hit the A and the E, and then you leap up. So, and then you're in position for the rest of the measure. So the fingering there is definitely intentional. It's what I think is the easiest way to play it. So I would suggest that even if you don't agree with me, that you at least give it a try. And then that way, if you want to switch it, you can do so intelligently and intentionally. You know why you're doing it that way. Okay, I think that's it. These modern worship songs, they're not super easy. They're a completely different style of music from typical hymn music or sacred music or certainly classical music. And so they require a little bit different approach. And I don't really know how to, I certainly would never even want to play these arrangements without singing them in my head, which is one of the reasons why I include the lyrics in here, so that it can be a moment of worship for you as you perform it. And as you as you do perform it and you're singing it in your head, you're thinking about the lyrics, and you let that not just sit in your head but come out in your fingers and your hands and your arms and your wrists, then that really leads to a really musical experience. And so I think it's easy for us to criticize these modern worship songs and say, oh, their melodies are so boring, and they're not interesting and whatnot. But actually, while that's true, they're not. I don't believe they're less musical or a less quality of musical composition. They're just different, and so they require a completely different approach and a completely different way of performing. And so, if you know that going into it, you can really make an arrangement like this shine, and it can really be a blessing both to you and to those for whom you're playing it. So, with that being said, I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next tutorial.